This is Danny Bobrow, President of AIM Dental Marketing, welcoming you to this installment of the Practice Perfection Web-Based Education Series. Today's presentation is titled, 8 Revenue Cycle Management Tools Your Practice Cannot Live Without, and will be delivered by Ms. Monique Long. While revenue cycle management may sound dry, or even overwhelming, it need not be. You are about to receive valuable tools and resources to help you navigate these treacherous waters. We'll dive in to those that are proven to work and not waste your valuable time with those that don't. Monique is the Chief Sales Officer for eAssist and loves helping practices thrive. With her 20-plus years of experience in the dental field as a dental assistant and dental practice manager, she puts her knowledge and experience to use in helping practices maximize their growth potential. Monique has served as a success consultant, project manager, and director of insurance verification, but her true passion lies in uncovering and exploiting practice success through revenue cycle management. As an attendee today, you will learn to identify and harness the tools and resources already in your dental practice management software to improve and track your cash flow, demonstrate how just 10 minutes a day can improve revenue cycle management in your practice, set clear expectations for your team and patients, and recognize the most common revenue cycle management roadblocks that are 100% avoidable. You are invited and encouraged to submit your questions at any time using the question button on the provided menu. If Monique cannot get to your question during the webcast, she has promised to do so shortly following her presentation. Attendance at today's event entitles you to apply to receive 1.5 hours of PACE-approved continuing education credit. Shortly following Monique's presentation, you will receive information on how to apply to receive your CE. To be eligible, you will need to successfully complete a brief quiz as well as note the following course number. So I always take a deep breath here to give everybody a chance to jot it down, although you'll also receive it in the follow-up email. But that number is LON 120122. Again, that's LON 120122. And now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the Practice Perfection stage, Miss Monique Long. Hello,
Hey.
Monique.
Hey there. Thanks so much, Danny. I really appreciate it. That was an awesome introduction. I'm coming to everyone today, as Danny mentioned, so that we can really just chat through those 8 revenue cycle management tools that we think you cannot live without. And I think as we go through it, you'll find that to be the same as well. So really excited to be here with all of you today. Now, you may be wondering, well, who is Monique in this eAssist that she works with? And so I want to give you a little bit of background first so you kind of understand the volume and weight, really, I'd say, of how impactful what we're able to do for the dental industry is and why it should matter to you. So I'd say as a company, we've been doing this for more than 2 years, putting money back into the pocket of our nation's dedicated dentists. We know you guys work so very hard and you deserve to get 100% of what's rightfully owed to you. And so our goal in everything we do is to provide you peace of mind, to help reduce stress for both yourselves and your front office team, to help create that reliable cash flow. Really, we love what we do. We have the pleasure of being able to service over serving thousands of practices across the US, both groups, DSOs, small practices, brand new startups. We get to fill those seats for a wide variety of practices and truly supporting them. And so to date, it's a pretty awesome feat, but we've collected over $11 billion from insurance companies to help support our practices that we have the pleasure of working with. Now, not to toot our own horn too much here, but I just wanted to share with you some of the accomplishments that we really are proud of as a company, both in the reputation that we've been able to garner for the way we support the dental industry and your front office teams, and making sure you're getting those funds back in your pocket. As I'm looking at this slide too, I see on the right, you see it says 10.9. That's because when I was first looking at the slides a couple days ago, it was 10.9. As of today, when I looked at it, it was 11.11. So that's why it's a little bit different. I just realized that I'll have to make sure I fix that in the future.
And how long did it take to add that extra billion to your collections?
Yeah. So that was, I want to say 2 days, maybe a 2-day difference. So
wow.
the thousands of practices we get to work with has a very powerful impact. So I didn't want to stay too long on this, but just to kind of add some credibility to the work that we accomplish for our practices, and also just being a great place to work too. I've had the pleasure of working with eAssist for 8 years, and I love every day of it. So let's really just get into the meat, though, of what we want to accomplish here. Danny, you outlined it very, very well. So I'll be brief here. So we have these 1, 2, and 3, the best tools and resources in your practice management software to improve and track your cash flow. How just 10 minutes a day can actually improve your revenue cycle management. I know it sounds crazy, but it's entirely possible. We'll talk about that, how setting those clear expectations, not just for your teams, but your patients as well, can make a great impact. And then the most common revenue cycle management roadblocks that are 100% avoidable. So I'm going to get to share with you some of the tips and tricks we get to use that help our practices be so successful. So first we'll go into this fun fact. Roughly 2/3 of Americans are enrolled in private insurance, and we know that number continues to grow. So we, of course, want to make sure that we're all keeping pace with that, leveraging that knowledge when it comes to utilizing the best tips and tricks for your practice to be successful. So obviously this means keeping a close eye on your revenue cycle management is extremely crucial. And so that's why I'm really excited that we'll be able to go into these 8 revenue cycle management tools that you just cannot live without, I assure you. So our first tool that I want to talk about are morning huddles. Now, we are finding more and more practices are having them, which is really, really great. It didn't used to be that way at all. But I'd say what I often seem to hear is that they don't view them as very productive, or it just kind of seems to take away time from them. It takes too much time. And so first, I'd just like to hear from you guys. We'd love to hear, we have a multiple choice poll that we can do. And I don't know if Danny, if you need a little time to queue it up or not.
Yeah, about a second and a half. Let me go ahead and launch that now. If you're ready, we can do it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
And just so you know, Monique, I don't know that you see the results as the presenter, but I will be sharing them.
Okay, perfect. I'll see if anything pops up, but as of right now, I'm not seeing anything.
Okay,
but from some background for all of you, it should allow you to, I think, click a few of the options. So if you find that, let's say you are reviewing balances, but then you also talk about personal things in it, you'd want to make sure you just check off the 2 or 3 or however many of them apply. I'm just curious, kind of like what we right now with our group, at least, what people are typically reviewing.
So the poll has been opened, and as Monique has shared, this is a multiple answer. And so when we get our percentages, they won't total 100, because you may well do more things than more than one thing in your huddle. I'm sure you do. And you may do more things than we're listing here. The poll was limited to these 5 options, but that's you can certainly, if you want to add something on the in the question box, we can talk about that. But I think Monique will do a pretty good job of covering what the different components are. So let me check. It says poll in progress, collecting responses. Oh, here we are. We're at 57% have voted. So let's give it a minute. Some of you may be driving, and obviously we'll understand if you don't complete the poll, and we prefer it that way.
We'll be tested on this part later. This is just for fun.
You don't hit a poll, right? All right. Well, we are about 80%. We're going to go ahead and close the poll.
And I cannot see it, so if you want to just share.
Okay, 75% said that they address outstanding patient and insurance issues. 50% talk about personal stuff. 50% month-to-date production, collections, setting goals. 50% pinpointing areas of weakness, and 25% do not do a morning huddle. So there you have it.
Yep. And so that kind of aligns with what we've typically seen, I'd say, where we see more and more are doing the morning huddles. So it is becoming the lower majority basically that aren't. But I'm hoping for those of you that aren't, you'll see the value once we're done here. And those of you that are, maybe some efficiencies that can be integrated into what you're already doing. I'd say that the most synergized and successful teams utilize their morning huddles, really to motivate, to strategize, and be proactive in addressing any potential roadblocks in the revenue cycle management. This is literally the most practical and logical way to maximize your effectiveness and efficiency for your entire practice. And you'll find those two words, effectiveness and efficiency. We're going to really be trying to sound that down throughout these 8 revenue cycle management tips to really help your practice thrive. So when it comes to these morning huddles, if you're not doing them, you're in the right place. What I'd suggest, if you're not driving, of course, is to maybe grab a paper and pen to maybe take some notes. Scientifically, if you actually are writing down something while you're listening, it's proven to sound down more for you. And so I think if anything, obviously throughout what we reviewed today, it resonates with you, I think writing it down can help just have a greater impact in it being able to actually stick. So when it comes to our pro tips, you'll see these throughout too. Morning huddles need to be scheduled early enough so that they can end at least 5 minutes before your scheduled appointment for the day. And it's really important that you're prepped and ready to go so that you're greeting your patients as soon as they walk in the door. You don't want them to feel like they're interrupting you because you're having it in the front office, for instance. So making sure it's going to have to be really intentional to be able to meet that standard of being done 5 minutes before your first patient's supposed to walk into the door, but absolutely doable, and we'll give you a lot of great tips on how to make that possible. So with these morning huddles, keeping them again effective and efficient, we'll want to know, well, how do we do that, right? So first, starting and ending on time. That's going to be very important. And keeping it to 10 minutes is going to be important too. And I know that could seem hard, but here's where these tips will help. So ideally, they're going to be held either in a break room, maybe a consultation room around a computer. Again, never at the front desk. You want to avoid that interaction of you're still wrapping it up and a patient comes in and they're not feeling very welcome. They're feeling like they interrupt you. We want to avoid that. So this really is also going to mean that for everyone involved in the office, they're going to have to make sure they've done everything before going into that meeting. That means, lights and computers are turned on, the room's set up, any last minute things that need to get done need to be taken care of. Grab your coffee, have it ready to drink there at the huddle, whatever it might be, making sure you're ready to go for the rest of the day as soon as that huddle starts. And so we want to
before you go on,
yeah?
Monique, I just wanted to chime in for a minute.
Yeah.
I know many people on the call are doing huddles, and I think many of them indicated that they do eat and chat about personal matters.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that the huddles, to be efficient and effective, they really need to be kind of sacrosanct, where those things are not done. I imagine that requires a bit of a shift. I mean, I would go so far as to ask people to keep their cell phones in their purse or on their desk during the. Do you have any advice or suggestions on how to sort of shift that emphasis so that people view the huddle in a slightly different way?
Yeah, I think one powerful element to it is the doctor leading by the example. And sometimes I think even just personality types, if you recognize that there's someone in the office, it could be a hygienist, an assistant, anyone really, there's some certain personality types where they're kind of leaders. People just kind of follow them. So if you were able to align with someone like that in your office and have a very clear, intentional conversation surrounding the importance of this and becoming effective with it, I think when you can get those types of personalities in line with you doing it too, you setting that example, that will have a really great impact in kind of shifting the way maybe they were before. And we'll also go into some other tips too, because nothing's wrong with wanting to build a team camaraderie. And part of that does have to do with talking about somewhat personal things. I'll tread lightly there. But when it comes to that, I would essentially say the 10-minute morning huddle is really not the spot for that. We also highly recommend having just like one, either weekly or bi-weekly or monthly. Every office is going to be different based on what their needs are. But just one larger team meeting. So, this is the huddle, the shorter, briefer 10-minute one daily. But then a team meeting where it's typically maybe over a lunch hour, about an hour long, basically. And that's where larger conversations can be had. Tabling those larger discussions and conversations, because, sometimes a big topic might come up that can't be resolved quickly. That's one of the tips I usually go over too, is we recommend, for instance, if you can't go into like solutioning something that is maybe a big issue, within 30 seconds, if it's going to take longer than 30 seconds, just keeping a separate list where on that list you can write down whatever the problem is and then readdress that in the larger team meetings that you would plan. So outside of the daily morning huddle. Does that make sense?
Sounds great. Yep. Good advice.
Awesome. And so I'd say too, with that list that you can keep, having it in a transparent spot where others can add to it. Sometimes in group settings, there's smaller voices that may not feel as comfortable bringing something up in a larger group setting. And as your team builds more and more trust with each other, that should hopefully change and shift. But initially in the beginning, just so everyone can have a voice, with that list, it's nice because then if everyone has access to it to add a topic that they want to have a deeper conversation about as a team that they feel is, important for the productivity of the practice, then it helps everyone just know that they're heard. And it will build trust within the entire team to just know that they're being heard, their opinions and are being considered and listened to. And that will just help a lot as well. Now, I'd say when it comes to those morning huddles, what we recommend too is just kind of rotating who leads those up every single week. So you'd have one person who can solidly do it each morning of that week. And what that does is that's going to really help build leadership skills within the office and just create a positive practice culture, I'd say, overall. And again, like I mentioned, those smaller voices sometimes, or maybe they just don't have the same skill set where to stay on topic or whatever it might be. If you find that there's someone on the team who's just stellar at taking care of those morning huddles, then you might want to pair them with someone that they can mentor even. So again, just building your team culture is really helpful within these elements as well. And so when it comes to, I'd say overall these huddles, avoiding distractions is going to be really important. So like we were talking earlier about those chit chat conversations, there's a lot of other instances throughout the day where that can occur. So if you want to talk about, you just finished watching the season finale of Andor or whatever show you like, I'd say avoid it in these 10-minute huddles. Not that you guys can't have those types of conversations at some point throughout the day, but these are really meant to be intentional and productive so that you can ensure as a team you have a very clear vision of what needs to happen that day. And so we'll go into details too on what those specific pieces will be that can be reviewed within that huddle. So here's some ideas as what we view as like the most beneficial topics to cover within this 10-minute huddle. And so I know it looks like a long list, but let's just break it down and you'll see how doable this is. So I like to usually start them with a celebration, something that you guys as a team can celebrate. It could be an operative win, a hygiene win, a business team win, whatever it might be. And the reason for starting on the positive when you first start a day like that is when we've won something, regardless of how big or how small it might be, it actually does something to our brain chemistry. And it changes it so that we feel more confident, more focused, even more smarter, more smart, even smarter. And so our cortisol levels actually are decreased, and hormones like testosterone increase and make us more likely to be able to tackle goals. So starting with a win like that can be very powerful, very simple too. And then next, each department should identify any challenges that they've come up with that might occur in that day based on the schedule. And so remember, again, if there's anything that might come up that could maybe spark a debate in any way, shape, or form that cannot be resolved within 30 seconds, table it, keep that list that your team can add to, and then you'd re-review that in a regular team meeting. That's usually an hour long. And then another thing to discuss are the previous day's challenges. And so this is going to look, sorry, excuse me. So this is going to be a look at the numbers from the day before and then overall for the month so far. So discussing these in the morning huddle is going to help identify whether you're on track or off track to meet those monthly goals. So this can also include like your net production, your net collections, your collection ratio, and your production per hour. And we're going to discuss that later as well, the production per hour. But you'd basically be asking, are we on track or off track for these things? Now, one kind of good rule of thumb, I'd say, when it comes to scheduling is to pre-block 50% of your production goals. And then that way you're already going to be halfway to your goal. So that's kind of like a small little pro tip along the way, I'd say. And then with your new patients coming in, you want to highlight who those are, as well as any ER patients, emergencies that may have called, but also opportunities within the schedule for any of those types of openings in case anyone calls as well. Because obviously if someone has an emergency, taking care of them right away will make them love you. But then also new patients. New patients hate getting pushed out months and months for that new patient appointment. So recognizing those types of opportunities within the schedule will be really helpful as well. And then when it comes to your other opportunities to identify specific, I don't know how many of you guys are using intraoral photos, but we know a picture is worth 1,000 words. So for new patients, for major operative appointments, SRP patients, emergencies that come in on that same day, when we can identify those patients that will need it, because if you have one, obviously there's going to be a certain op that they have to go into for it if it's not mobile. So that would help with efficiencies there. But we also know that intraoral photos also help with acceptance rates when it comes to treatment. And so that's again where that saying a picture is worth 1,000 words is so true here. If you basically have a picture for a tooth who comes, picture of a tooth for a patient who comes to you with a concern about their lower right molar hurting when they eat sweets. When you take a picture of that and you show that to Mrs. Jones, she's not a dentist, right? But when she's actually able to see what it looks like, it makes it very clear what's going on and that something needs to be done with this tooth, not just Sensodyne. Another option too is if, let's say, you're not comfortable or you're too busy to take those photos, is have your hygienist or your assistant do that. And then a kind of a cool trick is to leave that picture up for the patient to see. Your hygienist or assistant leaves the room briefly and says that they're going to go grab you. But by the time you've come back to that room, oftentimes the patient is going to be looking at it themselves, looking at things that to them don't look normal, that seem off to them, and they'll be asking you about what could be done. So those pictures can be really, really helpful in just overall case acceptance as well. Now, one of the really important things too with those intraoral photos, there are some plans that actually require pictures of it based on certain procedures. So that's where training is going to be really impactful for your team in the front to know and identify those types of procedures, and then they could let your your back office team know, hey, this patient coming in at this time needs this tooth number, a picture of it taken. So that is going to be helpful. And if you find that you're ever struggling there and knowing what needs to be done for these different procedure codes, I'd say Practice Booster, if you're familiar with Dr. Charles Blair, he's the coding guru out there. He has amazing books, Coding with Confidence. It's like the coding Bible, I'd call it. It has so many great tips and tricks, and those types of recommendations of, if you do this, then you're going to need this, this, and this to properly document to send to insurance. So very valuable tool that you can easily find online and have readily available to your front office team as well, as far as training goes. Now, I'd say next we want to highlight any of those scheduled changes, identifying overall holes for either same day treatment too, so not just the emergencies and the new patients, but actual treatment being done. Knowing ahead of time what's available is just going to eliminate any potential roadblocks. And then we're going to highlight any patients coming in that day that might have financial concerns. So we want to be prepared for having those conversations as well. And we'll talk on that a little bit deeper in a few slides as well. And so even though it's not listed here, I'd say I also just like to end with some kind of leadership statement from the doctors. And if you have like multiple doctors, you can rotate who takes lead on that. Because when we start that huddle on that positive note with that celebrating of wins, and then when we end on a positive note with something that just kind of allows the team to reflect on throughout the day, something that can motivate them, it really has such an awesome impact on just overall like having joy when you're working throughout the day with your team. And so if you're ever at a lack for words, you know, if you were to Google any options when it comes to maybe funny quotes or comic strips, or there's lots of great apps too that have like inspirational quotes of the day, you could always rely on something like that as well. And if anyone does that already and has some fun ways that they motivate their teams, feel free to drop that into the chat too. We'd love to see that. So I'll pause here a little bit to allow anyone who's not driving to scan this QR code. It's just really a great opportunity for you to have more impactful 10-minute huddles, and how that's possible. It will allow for it to be very structured, because, you know, at this point, we really do live in an era where time's everything. And so it seems like we never have enough of it. And patients just really appreciate too when, as a practice, you appreciate their time and staying on time. And so they feel stressed. And they can feel when an office is ineffective or inefficient. But on the flip side, they can also feel positive energy if they walk into an office that truly has like a motivated and happy team. And so starting your day off with just that 10-minute huddle can just be really great in motivating the team, and then also keeping your patients happy too, because they can see that difference between an office that has that type of energy and one that does not.
Thank you for sharing that template.
Yeah,
Monique,
I think I stayed on it long enough.
Yep, I think
Okay.
so. And people will get a chance to view the recording, and they'll be able to scan it at their leisure.
Thanks,
at that
Danny.
time too.
Yeah.
Sure.
So then I'd say for number 2, it's the multiple patient payment options is very important. I think the latest information from the ADA says that patients spend roughly $800 a year on dentistry, which really is not that much, but we know for patients, the truth of the matter is they think that dentistry is expensive. So when they have treatment plans that far exceed that $800 a year, maybe it's $5,000, maybe it's $15,000, maybe it's $40,000. Taking care of our patients means letting them know that they have options for making dentistry affordable for their budget. And so that's where this is going to be really important, to help supply and make those options available to them. So when it comes to payment options, it really, really helps to allow for greater case acceptance for those payment options for your patients. So you want to make sure that you're presenting clear financial agreements first. That is going to be important, so there's no misaligned expectations of what's being done and what the cost is for that treatment. And then when it comes to how they're able to pay, if you're stuck waiting for them to send that mail or send that check in the mail to you, that's going to really create a big delay in your income, basically, that you can rely on consistently. And so even just having quicker, easier to pay bill pay options, like there's online bill pay options that you could have through your website. There's quick and easy text to pay options that you could use instead. So many people text these days. So making it simple and easy for them to pay will also help you get paid a lot faster as well. And then of course we have our third-party financing options. When it comes to working with those, you'll want to research options that allow for that patient financing so that they have that flexibility available to pay for their treatment. And this allows you to take off your bank teller hat. We all know your time is going to be much, much better suited to be able to focus on dentistry and not have to serve as that bank for your patients. So when it comes to these third parties, they'd say you just want to make sure that you're operating within their regulatory requirements. Our next slide will actually I can touch on what one of those might be from time to time. So the pro tip is you're not a bank. And so have you ever had those instances where maybe a patient pays with a credit card or one of those third-party financing options, but then they ask you for a check back, payment back if they overpaid? So we want to always help you make sure that just having those established, clear internal processes for your team will really help when it comes to refunds. And specific to regulatory requirements, many of them have a requirement where if there was an overpayment, you're not supposed to refund them that. That's supposed to actually be refunded back to the original form of payment. So just really making sure, I'd say, that you read through the contracts thoroughly if you ever go through a third party, but those can really just help create higher case acceptance and just make the treatment affordable for your patients as well. And so that takes us to number 3. That's our daily production and collection report. So reviewing these numbers, it's really something that's so important for the whole team to be aware of. And it creates buy-in and holds everyone accountable for the roles that they play individually in meeting overall goals. And so when it comes to this report, it should be done regularly. I will say oftentimes we find that maybe only one person truly is focusing on this, if they even have the time to focus on this because they're so busy with the day-to-day and caring for the patients that are coming and going. But when it comes to being able to review it, we'd recommend that it be done at minimum weekly during those weekly team meetings you guys would have. That's that longer 1-hour meeting. And it's going to help tell us a few things. It's going to tell what the gross production is, how much we've done, how much work's been done. And then that net production, that tells us, well, at the end of the day, after all write-offs and adjustments are done, how much can you actually collect on to cover expenses? And then we should schedule in a way that's going to, set us up for success in meeting our overall goals. That's that common term of scheduling to goal. Now, collections is how much we're actually collecting, right, from our patients and insurance, and it should be reviewed daily to ensure that we meet our goal for the month. These are basically funds available to cover your expenses. They're sitting there in the bank because that's what you're able to collect. If collections are down, that would trigger the why. Why are they down? And there could be a variety of reasons. It might be that someone hasn't had time to work the aging report. So these claims that are overdue are just sitting out there not being paid on yet. It could mean that the team's gotten into a bad habit of not collecting up front at the time of service from patients for their amount due. It could mean someone's fallen behind on sending patient statements or they haven't even been going out. So that's why it's so valuable to make sure these reports are being reviewed at least weekly, because then you're going to be able to see if they are down, where the trends are and what's happening, and better understand what you can do to help resolve the problem. So when it comes to collection ratios, I'm wondering, just give this some thought. it's more of a rhetorical question, I'd say, but how much are you collecting on a month on average? So when it comes to how you calculate the collection ratio, you take your net collections and you divide that number by your net production. Now, ideally, you should be collecting at least 98% of the work that you've been able to do when it comes to what's collectible. But we find that the average dental practice is only collecting at a ratio of 91%. And so that's a really big difference when it comes to what is possible versus what many practices are doing. Now, I would say to take note that if there is a big difference between your gross production and your net production, it's likely a collection. It's not likely a collection issue. It's more likely that it's a write-off issue. And so that would also be something that you'd want to look at closely if there was ever a big difference there. And so again, that net production, that's what tells us how much you can physically collect and put in the bank after your write-offs. Now, when it comes to number 4, that's our insurance and patient aging reports. I did touch on that just a moment ago, but the key tools in managing your revenue cycle are reviewing this in detail. And when it comes to practices, 70% of dental practices are knowingly leaving around 9% of collectible revenue. That's usually going to be because of either missed dental billing or patient billing steps. So let's put this in perspective. What could collecting that additional 9%, since most are collecting 91, what could collecting an additional 9% of revenue mean for your practice? So here we have an example of an average dental practice, which is collecting revenue of 1.5 million. So 9% of that is going to be 135,000 a year. That's not being collected. And so if you were to put that over a length of a 30-year dental career, that's more than $4 million. And this impacts everyone on the team. One thing I really want you to think about is all the overhead has been paid on this. We've already paid rent, utilities, paid your team, dental supplies, lab bills. So this could literally fall entirely into profit.
And the economist in me has to hasten to add, this doesn't really account for the time value of money, the foregone interest that you could have earned on all that money.
Very true.
Much
Great
higher.
point there, Danny. So true. And so if you were to able to have that back, raises, incentives, retirement plans, I want you guys to just really think on that. What could you do for your team, for your patients, for your bank account with an extra $4 million? Do a bonus system, maybe purchase that digital scanner or laser that's been on that wish list of yours, pad your retirement so you could retire sooner. That's leaving a lot on the table. That there's just so many different things that you could do. So here's a pro tip to help begin working towards these goals. I'd recommend pulling your insurance and patient aging reports regularly, reviewing all the outstanding balances over 30 days old, and then follow up to collect the outstanding revenue. So what we usually recommend doing is starting with the oldest, working backwards from there. So usually the 90-day mark. And the reason for that ultimately is because of timely filing. Most insurance plans, the timely filing is a year. But if you're working with Medicaid, it's months. And that basically means that if, let's say, maybe your team did send that first claim, but no follow-up was done, then some follow-ups finally done a year later when someone finally has time to look at it, and insurance says, no, we never even got the claim. If a year's passed, they're technically within their rights to not have to pay you. And so that's where and why I'd say we recommend going 90 days past due, working backwards from there, but essentially you want to get to a point where you're touching every claim that goes into aging over 30 days old. And so as you're working those aged claims, best practices would be to work on them every 10 to 14 business days. And that really just is going to show those insurance companies you mean business. You're on top of your accounts. And then with the patient statements, we'd recommend at least sending them a minimum of once a month. And that's like the bare minimum. I'd say for larger practices, maybe even sending them weekly or biweekly and in stages can be really helpful, because oftentimes when a statement goes out, your front office team will typically get an influx of people calling with questions about their statement. So to help alleviate that, so it's not all happening, that one day of the month where everyone seemed to get their statements and it's just chaos in the front, when you can phase it through different parts throughout the month, it can help with just having a more consistent flow in the front as well. So I've seen instances where maybe you divide up everything, like last names A through M go out the first week, last names N through Z go out the third week. And I personally just recommend that you send statements out on I'm trying to think, Monday through Wednesday, are typically going to be the better times. And the reasoning behind that is when you send them Thursday or Friday, they're likely going to get to your patients to where your patients call you Monday. Mondays, we all know, are already pretty crazy in a practice. And so being able to send them either Monday through Wednesday can help avoid making Monday even crazier. Let Monday be Monday and just do those other dates. Now, if you want to get really technical, you could actually just test it yourself. Send yourself a statement as an example, just to see how long it takes to get to you, and then you can work backwards from there too. So that gets us now to number 5. So insurance verification, I'd say, is arguably the most important dental billing step, because nothing else can happen without it. Well, at least not effectively and efficiently. And as I mentioned before, that's what we're trying to do, is help you be as effective and efficient as possible. So why is it so important? One, it's going to help minimize rejections, to help ensure that we have the accurate information on file before the claim ever goes out. And so I want to make a differentiation here real quick between the difference of a rejection from insurance and a denial. So a rejection is basically where it might just be that some information is missing or inaccurate. Your clearinghouse could even kick it back to you and it just gets rejected of going out. Sometimes it makes it all the way to insurance and they reject it because just something's not accurate or is missing. Now, a denial is basically where the payer has received it and adjudicated it, but they've determined that it's not payable. And I'd say even the most seasoned insurance guru can transpose numbers incorrectly. We know, unfortunately, that human error, it's unavoidable. And so even someone who's great at it, when you're in the front, there's just so many different things you're working on. You're answering phones, scheduling appointments, checking patients in and out, creating treatment plans and reviewing them, collecting patient payments, verifying benefits, trying to keep a busy, productive schedule and fill openings as they come up, verifying everything. There's just nonstop, something's coming at you when you're in the front. And so it could be very easy to just miss that one number and switch it with another on accident. And so I even had a dentist once who was so frustrated. He said something to the effect of, like, if I made all these mistakes in dentistry, I wouldn't even be able to have my license anymore. And I think it's just not realizing, yeah, that is true for sure. You'd lose your license if you made a lot of mistakes, but you also get to go and practice on one patient. You kind of get to zone out and be there specifically in that one spot. You don't have all these other things you have to do all at once around you in addition to practicing that dentistry. And so that's
a good point.
Yeah.
And it's fair. But, yeah, I think it also raises the issue of what's called the multitasking myth, which
right.
is that, human beings are only wired to do one thing well at a time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure what you're talking about, and I know we'll continue to talk about, right, is the importance of viewing non-clinical protocols or, tasks as protocols, that you have right, a consistent way of doing things, and you view it as just as important as your clinical work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so true. And I'd say, when it comes to insurance verification, it's not a hard thing to do. It's literally, I'd say, one of the first things you learn when you're learning the front office is how to verify benefits. But it is time consuming. There's extremely long hold times with insurance companies. And then when you're trying to multitask and do it, it can just be a simple slip of one digit being off, and now everything's going to get denied and pushed out longer for you to get paid. And so what I really recommend is having that pre-appointment readiness plan so that all your patients have shared their insurance benefits with you before they've even entered the practice, not waiting for them to just hand it over as soon as you're in there. I'd say specifically if you're a very insurance-driven practice, that's going to be important. And so I'd say the number one missed billing step is bypassing insurance verification. We've seen instances where you get this really awesome case that you get to do, and you complete the treatment. You did, let's say it was a bridge, and you do it this month in December. Patient wants to use up their benefits before end of the year. Then you seat the bridge in January just because your schedule is completely booked up. And it turns out that this is a plan that pays on seat date, not on prep date. And because you didn't do the verification, you didn't know that, and now the claim's being denied. So those are the types of stories we hear over and over and over again when people don't make the time to do these verifications. They're just extremely vital to ensure that you're going to get paid for all the hard work that you do. And so if you can work, if you don't already do this consistently, to make it a non-negotiable, that absolutely every single time a patient comes in, they need a verification of benefits, it's gonna just really help your practice thrive so much more. And so I'm not really sure what your philosophy is, but here's what I find, that most of the time what needs to be done differently or where we might need to pivot isn't something that's technically really difficult or even something someone doesn't know how to do. It's just tasks that are fairly simple or easy to learn, but we just don't have the time to do them. And so obviously from that slide before, we show the pain points that can happen when we don't make that time. And so that's where I'd say just setting really solid systems in your practice will be very valuable so that everyone knows if this, then this. So for example, when it comes to verifying benefits, if you have a patient that has that active coverage, then confirm that they're still active in their next visit. So you already did their full breakdown of benefits because they were new. When they come back in the same year, verify again, make sure they're still eligible, make sure what's remaining of that maximum and deductible, because it's possible they went to a specialist or a different dentist while they were out of town and they didn't tell you, but the benefits that you thought were there based on knowing their maximum, deducting what you did so far, turns out it's not there, right? Relying on just your patient to say these things is not going to be enough. And so I'd say confirming that all the information is still the same and matches is important too. So I'd say a general good rule of thumb. Absolutely, for sure, ask your patient, has there been any changes to your benefits? But even then, that's not the end all be all. That doesn't mean that you can fully 100% rely on just that. And if they say, yes, there has been, I would do a new full benefit breakdown. If they say, no, I still have the same plan, then I would, and it's the same year, then I'd still recommend checking the benefits and just verifying remaining max and deductible. But, oh, sorry, and I should go over this part too at the bottom. A full insurance verification is essentially doing that deeper dive. You're getting a full breakdown of all their benefits, what's covered, what's not, frequency limitations, max deductible, everything. And so when it comes to doing the verifications, it's one of those things where, oh, I won't jump ahead. Sorry, I was about to jump ahead on my pro tip. I'll pause there. But I'll go into the 65% of insurances being, or offices being driven by insurance. That really means that we need to make sure we're staying ahead of the times and being aware of what our patients' plans are going to be. Because a big gap that can just wreck your relationship with your patient is when you treatment plan something for them, but you didn't do an up-to-date verification of benefits. And so they lose their trust in you when you provide a treatment plan that is not accurate because those benefits weren't checked. And so it's really going to have a great impact, especially with social media. You could end up with negative reviews. Having a solid treatment plan based on accurate information is going to be just so vital, especially considering how many practices are driven by insurance. So here's that pro tip I was mentioning. When it comes to having the most accurate information, we've found that asking your patients to either text you through a HIPAA compliant form, even email could work, the front and back copy of their insurance card prior to the appointment, that will really help when it comes to human error issues. For instance, we have plenty of instances where the front office team has added the ID number for a patient. We go to submit the claim for them. It gets kicked back as, not a valid ID. When we know that that front and back card has been scanned into the patient's chart, we go and investigate. We go and look into that to see, what can I do to be proactive here to see what might be off here? And sometimes it's the patient who even might have written it down wrong on their forms, and then it got entered to the system incorrectly. But again, when we have that copy of that front and back of the insurance card, it's something that's just quick and easy to refer to and be able to fix very efficiently without any wasted time and delay in you getting paid. And so now we're at 6. These are treatment plans. So I kind of touched on that. When it comes to treatment plans, we want to make sure in the insurance verification side that they're accurate. And so when it comes to treatment plan acceptance, it can also sometimes hinge with just a simple word choice. So you're maybe wondering, well, what do you mean by that? So you see these 2 examples. Have you ever noticed how words, they just have a way of taking us either closer or further away from something? These words, for example, cost or price, they can actually kind of have a little bit of a negative connotation. So if we were to just shift that, maybe when the treatment's under 500, we could use the word fee. Or if the treatment's over 500, at that point, it's like an investment really for your patients. So
I think this is a very, this is a good example, very similar to your advice about how you kick off a morning huddle with a positive story or message, because words have power and they're subconscious. They can really shut down the person's, they can either enhance or hinder a person's openness to the rest of what you have to say.
Absolutely. That was literally, I was about to say, words have power. So you took the words right out of my mouth, but they really do. And they can have either a powerful positive impact or something that leaves someone walking away feeling really negative. And so obviously we want to have that positive impact so that when the patient walks away, they feel excited or happy about what's about to happen versus a negative of debt or costs, how it will affect them. And so our pro tip here is to nail down verbiage as a team to show your patients really that you guys care. And then it's going to help just set those reasonable expectations, have those very clear understandings with patients when it comes to what their co-payments are at the time of service. And I'd say here, sometimes this might require practice for your team. If you have someone, for instance, who is working in the front and they are not comfortable or confident in presenting a treatment plan that's going to be $5,000, or even like one of those really big ones that's going to be $40,000, you're going to probably see a lower case acceptance if you have someone like that presenting to your patients. If they don't see the value or they're shy or nervous about saying those numbers, your patient will notice that. And so having a team practice, you could do that in one of those team meetings, those hour-long ones, where to make it kind of fun, you could have everyone throw into like a bowl or something on a strip of paper, just write down terms that they hear patients ask that maybe make them feel uncomfortable. Like, oh, well, how much is it going to be? Or do you have payment plans? Or I only want to do it if my insurance is going to pay. You know, just think up all the different things that they hear that sometimes are just hard for them to overcome. And then as a team, you can each pull one out and just kind of say, well, I think I'd say this, and you guys can talk through it and discuss it and practice together. Because the more you do something like that, you're going to feel much more comfortable and ready and prepared for those types of conversations with your patients as well.
Well, I'm very glad that you mentioned practice, Monique. Do you have any specific, and you know, and I know that the best, fastest way to learn is to practice, is to role play. Do you get involved in that, or do you have any advice for our attendees on how to structure those role plays so that they're taken seriously and that, you know, they spend the optimum amount of time and the optimal frequency to get the job done?
I agree. So it kind of depends on how frequently you're having your team meetings, and maybe this just gives you pause for thought when it comes to those meetings. Do you maybe have them once a month now? And if you realize, oh, this is something my team really struggles with, then maybe move them to be more frequently for now. If maybe cover lunch for the team, like order taken, and you guys do that once a week where you just role play over and over and over until everyone's feeling more and more confident. And it'll be a fun team building activity as well.
It does get to be fun. People, they have a hard time believing that at first, but once you overcome
at first you feel a little embarrassed and sheepish, but it helps build up that team camaraderie too. So like the more and more you do it, it does, like you said, it becomes fun.
The team begins to gel. If you view it like a scrimmage, you know, that a football or baseball team would play a practice game, then it actually gets to be fun, and it's something that people look forward to doing, and that rising tide raises all boats too. So
very, very true. Absolutely agree. So now we're at number 7. We just have 2 more. So this one's on our financial processes. So we have that term for setting a floor limit for treatment amounts. And so this is going to be specific, obviously, to your practice and when you would require a financial agreement. So essentially that means that it's going to be this pre-selected amount, so that amount of treatment, and you know, maybe you'll say it's $500. That means $500 worth of treatment or more will require that whenever that comes up, your front office team now knows that they need to make sure a formal written agreement is in place. That would need to be reviewed with the patient, and then the patient would need to sign off on. And you can make sure you give your patient a copy of it, save the original copy in their chart. Now, I'd say though, to keep in mind that really best practice will be to always have a treatment plan. And so we're using 2 different words just to differentiate that to treatment plan versus a financial agreement. So the financial agreement is for whatever limit you say, that limit and higher. It's more formal than just, you know, a treatment plan that maybe your practice management software can print up easily, and we'll usually have like a blurb at the bottom. And this blurb, I'll kind of give a general phrase of what it will usually say, is very important to have on both. But basically, it will usually say something to the effect of, if by chance, like insurance happens to not pay for any reason, that the patient is basically acknowledging that they're responsible for the cost at the end of the day, regardless of what insurance does or doesn't do. And it's acknowledging that it's just an estimate of what is believed insurance will pay based on that completed insurance verification. And so with that, what I was saying was that just best practice is to have a treatment plan for everything you do in place. And they can also sign those at the bottom, but for sure having something that clears you when it comes to larger treatment plans is just going to protect you really. And you'll want to make sure it's just really vital that you stay consistent with that. And what I mean is, I've worked with doctors where they were very generous and nice to their patients, but it kind of almost created a lot of extra work for everyone involved, in that you didn't know a set financial plan for the front office, because the doctor on a case-by-case basis might just say, oh, that's my neighbor, let's do this for them. That's my friend's friend, let's do that for this person. And it was all over the place. And that really creates chaos for the front office, not having that consistency for you as a doctor, having to be pulled away from patients on the case-by-case basis to say, hey, are you going to do something for this one patient? When you're able to just have a very consistent financial process in place, it will help save everyone a lot of time and also create potential issues of, let's say you gave one patient a discount and the next one who comes in and does the same thing you don't, and they say, well, you gave this to my neighbor. It just helps relieve a lot of potential issues that can come up when you just do those case-by-case basis. Having just a set, consistent plan in place across the board for everyone is going to keep you more efficient and effective overall. And so now we're at our final one, number 8. So why would a profit and loss reporting be so important? I'd say that in the same way that a dentist can diagnose treatment without radiographs, you can't diagnose the health of your practice without actually seeing the profit and loss and having an accurate reflection of what your overhead is. So the profit and loss statement, it's going to let you know what your monthly overhead costs are. So basically, what do you need monthly to break even just to keep your doors open? And so we want to take this number and then divide that by the total monthly hours of operation. So the amount of hours you're seeing patients monthly. To put it in perspective, if let's say you had multiple doctors in one office, you're not trying to calculate how much they each produce. It's just how many hours a month is your practice open. And then in this example, we have a practice with an overhead expense of $20K and who's operating 144 hours a month. So dividing these two numbers is going to let us know exactly how much revenue we need to bring in to the practice just to cover the overhead. And you'll see that's $138.80. That's per hour. And so now I'd say a few things to just put this in perspective. If you were at that 91% collection rate, which we know a lot of practices typically are, when it comes to that, that would mean that you'd need a net production of around $22,000 a month just to cover your overhead costs, just to keep those lights on. But if you actually had a collection ratio at the 98% range a month, then you're only going to need $20,400 a month. Now that's a $1,600 a month difference in monthly savings by collecting at that 98% range. So I just want to put those numbers in perspective for you too, like 91% to 98%, massive difference in what you get to have in your pocket instead. So our pro tip here is calculating your practice's hourly overhead rate is really just going to help you determine how much you need to be producing per hour simply to cover your expenses. So you of course want to set scheduling goals in your practice management software to produce more per hour than that example that I just showed. That would be the bare minimum that you'd need to make to just break even. And so we want to make sure you're getting paid for everything that you're doing. So to run a more profitable practice, you absolutely need to make more than that bare minimum. So I'd say something you'll find very helpful will be to break down your revenue and expenses into more practical applications specific to your office. So improving that profitability, it doesn't mean you're only increasing your production per hour. There's an article by Dr. Warren Willis. He wrote this really great article in Dental Economics. It was called, I have a note here, let me see. It's called 12 Ways to Boost Practice Profitability. And in it, he just outlines the importance of calculating your overhead and a lot of different ways that can help you rein in expenses to reduce that overhead. So I absolutely highly recommend checking that out. It's extremely helpful for practices. And it's also helpful for you to review an itemized P&L report monthly because it should, I'd say, include the type of cost, the amount of the cost, the percentage of the overhead. And again, you can get that percentage of overhead by dividing the amount of your overhead cost by the total collections. And so I'd say, just as a point of reference, as you look at overhead in comparison of a national median of overhead for practices, most general dentists are at 75%. And then I'd say specialists are super close. They're hover just under that at 74.9%, just to help put that in perspective as you're looking into it for yourself. But you'll want to make sure too that you're comparing your individual monthly overhead expenses to just see where you can cut costs to help reduce the overhead. And again, going back to Dr. Willis's article, he has some great recommendations too, and being able to negotiate. Don't be afraid to negotiate. You have your lab costs that you can look into negotiating, maybe your lease costs. There's a variety of different opportunities that you might be leaving on the table that might be worthwhile to look into to see how you can reduce that overhead. And I'd say too, just not to be afraid of like reaching out to your colleagues. If you know someone is doing really well and succeeding, talk to them, see what they do for their overhead costs. Maybe they have a tip and trick that has been really successful to them, and you know they don't want to toot their own horn, but if you ask them, they may be willing to share. So, you know, not reinventing the wheel, just learning from those around you too. And I'd say the biggest thing when it comes to that profit and loss is don't just work off of a guesstimate. Be very strategic, have it based on those line item by line item to get very specific. And that's going to help you know how and where you may have some room to do some negotiations to reduce some of your costs too. And so kind of in summary, I'd say of this, we know that a scarcity mindset, it really just needs to be one of the past. We want to focus on the future, abundance, setting aggressive goals, using the tools we outlined today even, and learning from those who've already figured it out, how we can be efficient. And so we are in an industry, I'd say, full of high achievers. And so it doesn't mean we have to be perfect. We just have to be resourceful. And there are just so many awesome tools out there. And so Napoleon Hill, I think, said it best. He said that the biggest reason for failure is the inability to make new plans to replace the plans that didn't work. So I hope that these 8 revenue cycle management tools can help you identify maybe areas in your practice that aren't working and areas where you can highlight and make a pivot to become more efficient and effective in your practice. Now, I do have just a brief overview for you on how our company, eAssist, has been able to help the thousands of practices that we have the opportunity of working with succeed. So you'll see here there are a variety of services and ways that we can help support the front office. We have our dental billing service, which helps I'd say that's our core service. It helps ensure that the claims are being followed up on regularly to make sure you're getting paid for all the hard work that you put in on a day-to-day basis. So we're checking for accuracy after your team's created claims. We're sending those claims for you, ensuring that they have all the necessary narratives, attachments, everything we know the insurance companies are looking for to make sure it gets processed that first time around. And our goal really is to collect 100% of what's rightfully owed to you. So when and if they deny and those benefits were checked and were there, we fight to get those claims paid. And we're very incentivized and motivated to get those claims paid because that's how our team gets paid. They are paid based on the results for you, not their efforts. So that's very different than having someone at an hourly wage work for you. But we also have credentialing. We know that's so important. If you have a new doctor in your office and they're not credentialed, you're going to end up with a lot of denials or out-of-network benefits and upset patients. So credentialing is so important to stay on top of ensuring that whatever you've shared with your teams as far as being in-network goes is true, and those claims can get processed properly. And then, of course, there's the insurance verification service that we offer. And that pairs really well with our dental billing service because with that, we're able to essentially take off the entire insurance processing side of things for you and your team. Those long hold times, they're literally not even going to ever have to deal with an insurance company again in that way when we can pair our verification service with that dental billing service. And then we have our accounting service where we're able to help with bookkeeping and reconciliation of your EFTs, you know, making sure, and really all your payments, making sure that the payments that got posted to the practice management software truly were posted and went into your account as well. That is great too, because it helps avoid instances of potential fraud from anyone in the front office. It allows us to truly ensure that everything's reconciling and actually going into your account, not just you seeing what was posted to your practice management software. And so a lot of practices love using that, and it saves. I talked to one poor dentist one time who said that he had to put all his bills out on Sunday. He'd lay them all out on the floor and spend all the time to make sure and check his accounts to see what went where, what got paid. And when we were able to take this off his plate, he's like, now I finally get to spend time with my family. So we know those are such important things for the health of your practice and your bank account. And when we can manage that for you, it can save a lot of time. And then
I will share briefly just that my father was a dentist, and he passed in 1983. But he used to. We always knew when it was time for the statements each month, and it wasn't a time for family time. It was a time that he had to sort of hunker down in the office and do paperwork that he really didn't care to do. But it was a necessary evil, and those days are largely behind us for most practices, thanks to services like yours, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing too I'll say about it is we do it all through QuickBooks Online too. So you have access to it. It's extremely transparent and safe too, because it's not that we're getting like live access to your bank account. It's just the view only access to your bank account too. So it's very secure as well. And we always ensure for practices that, for instance, use dental billing with us and our accounting service with us, that it's never the same team working it either. So that person who works in the accounting piece doesn't have access to do anything in your dental practice management software. It's just them reconciling specifically. Then I'd say with our patient billing service, this is a great addition to our dental billing service as well, because these are the AR sides, right? The making sure you're getting paid from the insurance side for dental billing, but then the patient side for patient accounts. So we're sending statements. We're the one answering those difficult questions patients might have if insurance happens to not pay, and working through that with them to get your patients to pay as well. So that helps alleviate sometimes those tough conversations that can have, and you get to blame your billing department instead. And then we have our full schedule service. That's our final service offering. And really what that does is it helps keep a busy, productive schedule. So we're working your recall, and it's not like an Autobot who's just texting everyone saying, hey, come in. It's a very personable live person calling your patients. They'd almost seem as though they were in your practice, because they're going to review patient notes. Maybe there's something that was mentioned about a vacation that your patient just went on. They're going to be very interactive with your patient and say, hey, we miss you. We want you back in, and here's when we can get you in. When are you free? And they can also do that for treatment. We usually just recommend that it's more recent treatment, right? Not something that was treatment planned a year ago, but maybe with, as long as it's been within the last few months, then we can also do that for people who have treatment plans but just never got in the books.
It was actually that service. I don't even know if you know this, Monique, but it was that service we were made aware of by a couple of our health partners that are working with you with eAssist, that it caused me to reach out to you in the first place. Because
oh, no way, I didn't realize that. That's really awesome. That is our service offering too.
We have some questions about that, so when we get into the Q&A session, we may ask you to elaborate on that a bit, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. And so when it comes to, I'd say, just us as a company, as eAssist, we really are about delivering peace of mind. Our founder and CEO of our company, he's a practicing dentist who's founded and opened several practices and still practices dentistry to this day. So really all our offerings and what we do is about growing the industry and helping it thrive. And for those we have the pleasure and opportunity to work with, giving them that peace of mind so they get to focus on their patients and practicing dentistry, and we get to focus on helping ensure they are getting paid for all the work that they do. And so now I think we have time for the Q&A. If you want to take it over, Danny.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the, really went fast, and you packed a lot into a short period of time. So That was terrific. And before we do dive into Q&A, we had talked about an offer that you were planning
Oh,
to
yes.
extend to our attendees. Could you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. So if anyone wants to learn more from eAssist, Danny's going to be able to email everyone these details too. But basically, we are offering for anyone that attended and would like to sign up for services for a dental billing service, we're going to offer exclusively $250 off your first invoice with us as long as you sign up by the 15th. So you have a couple weeks for that. But my team would love to connect and talk through, what your needs are, where your pain points are, and how we can support you. And I'd say for everyone that ever signs up with eAssist, there's a couple of other really cool perks and benefits they get. There is Practice Booster. So I mentioned Dr. Blair earlier, how he has those books, Coding with Confidence. Those are through Practice Booster, the company. And so we have a partnership with them where exclusively our clients get free access to Practice Booster online. And so what that is it's really cool, quite honestly. It would basically be like, let's say you're a doctor, you did a procedure that you don't regularly do, and you're just not sure the best way to code it. You could type in a description of what you did, and it's going to generate for you tips and tricks similar to the Coding with Confidence book, how that does that, tips and tricks on how to best code it out. And so that you get as a free resource when you use our dental billing service. And then another really great perk is that's part of once you sign up as an added bonus is a membership to Dental Buying Power. And that is inclusive of your signing up with with our dental billing service. But what it means basically is that it's like a savings program. Because we work with so many practices, we get a lot of great deals on a variety of services. And so you basically have those available to you. You can opt in at no obligation to any of them that seem to suit your needs. So those are just two things everyone gets when they sign up for dental billing, but specific for this, as long as you sign up by the 15th, you get $250 off your first invoice for dental billing.
All right, and as you said, we'll repeat and clarify the offering and what you need to do to redeem the offering in the email blast that will follow tonight's presentation. Charles Blair is great. We've hosted him on Practice Perfection before, and the Practice Booster is an awesome service, and especially, many of our attendees are committed to the oral systemic practice model, and many seemingly elective procedures, if you apply the tips and tricks that are available, right, you can get reimbursement for many of those procedures. So yeah, that alone would be worth the investment, not the cost.
Agreed.
So with that, let me dive into some questions here. First question is for you, Monique, does your firm outsource to other countries?
So I'd say in short, no, we don't. We call the people that work with us our eAssisters, they're success consultants. And so they essentially are people who work across the US. They're all over. And on average, they have 5 to 7 years front office experience. So they're very skilled and knowledgeable when it comes to working with these insurance companies, because they actually have worked with them in an actual dental office setting. So they are all based in the US.
Very good. Does eAssist utilize artificial intelligence to do its work? That's a good, interesting question.
Well, I'd say when it comes to like the majority volume of the work that we do, it is done by our success consultants. And of course, we have some internal efficiencies set up to ensure, for instance, when it comes to our reporting, because we're very transparent with what we report to our practices on a daily basis, so they can see the work we're doing. So we have some efficiencies there as far as that intelligence goes. But I'd say right now, when it comes to AI, it's not 100% commercially viable at this point. So for now, it's probably not being used to the capacity that I think maybe some other companies might be using it. But that's also because when it comes to the human side, that element, as far as the efficiencies that they have and just the knowledge, right? What I've found has happened sometimes with the ones that are very strongly AI backed, they don't have the people side. So what happens is it will say, hey, this was wrong, and then push it back to the office to do it. And they don't have the people to actually do what needs to be fixed. And so our team is able to accomplish that. Now, I know internally, we're actually testing a few things right now, and we've seen some pretty cool things where it would basically mark, hey, look at this. It needs to be looked at again before it gets sent out. So it helps red flag things in case someone missed it. But I'd say at this point, you know, we're only ever going to do anything that's we know commercially viable and has proven to be successful 100%. And it's just not there fully. So we definitely have the knowledge base when it comes to those success consultants to be able to really just be so efficient.
Yeah, I would echo that experience. We have a dental marketing dashboard that our health partners benefit from, and a component of it is call scoring. And we've tested various AI components to try to. Purpose of the call scoring is to identify bona fide new patient scheduling opportunities, and then calculate the team's batting average, how well they did, what percentage of calls were converted into solid and kept appointments. And there's certain elements that can be utilized that you can harness AI for, but at the end of the day, we still need a human being to listen to determine, did this result in an appointment? So very similar experience, but yeah, the technology, one thing you can never say is never when it comes to technological advance.
Very, very true.
And so, yeah, and this is a question that was asked, I had actually mentioned too. Can you tell us a little bit more about your full schedule service?
Yeah.
How that works?
So with that service specifically, what will happen is you'll be assigned one person to work that if that's the only service we're doing. And they'll usually meet with you first before the service starts, just to understand where your needs are. Because some practices, for instance, might say, hey, even if you have someone who's overdue for treatment or a recare appointment, and they have a balance of $50 or $100, you know, whatever limit they specifically set, please don't call them. And so we're just trying to gauge and understand what those types of outlines might be specific to the practice, so we know how to operate. And then once we have that in place, we have various tiers that will allow for us to set either a certain amount of appointments or a certain amount of production. So it's going to be one or the other, not that they'd ever hit both. So if they hit one tier really early on in the month, then they may go to the office and say, hey, we already hit this first tier. Do you want us to stop basically this month in calling and we'll begin again next month? Or do you want us to continue and work to get to that second tier? And what's nice about it too is that when we work within this service for practices, as I mentioned, it's just very personable. It's giving that personal touch of, like I've even had people say that when they had their patient come in, they thought that the person they talked to on the phone was going to be there.
I've heard that. No, it really works well. Have you had a chance to calculate any ROI numbers? Because I know that our health partners are very pleased with,
good. I'm glad to hear that. I don't offhand have that now, but I do know as far as the cost goes, it is very reasonable, because one of the things too is that, let's say they don't quite hit a tier, I believe, and only because I don't have the data right here in front of me, and I know I'm sharing my screen and I don't want you guys to have to see everything else I might have to look up. I believe that they deduct, like, I want to say $10 for every appointment that didn't meet the right tier. So it's really just great too, because you're not even having to pay the premium amount if they didn't fully hit the goal either. They're
very generous
for you a little bit. Yeah, I'd say the one thing though that I always like to clarify with the service, just as a company, we're all about transparency and just being very straightforward, is when it comes to when we schedule. So let's say someone on our team was working this month to schedule. We're not only scheduling for this month, right? We also want to take into the factoring of the patient schedule and their availability. So it may be that we schedule some appointments next month because that's when they're free, and that would count towards the goals that we're trying to hit.
Yep. Yeah, there's that timing issue. We have the same thing. Difference between sometimes our health partners will say, well, you're showing me that you set 48 appointments this month,
Right.
and according to our records, we scheduled 44 or 54.
Right. Yep.
And the difference is that we're reporting on appointments and they're reporting on patient visits. And appointments that we schedule this month may not show up or be scheduled until next month. So there's that. It's a similar kind of a variance. This attendee asks, how can you confirm how to calculate my P&L? Or can you confirm that?
Oh, sure. So kind of just as a reminder, then what you're doing to do it is you take your monthly overhead expense. And so that again is, we talked about that at the very end, where you want to make sure you have, like, you're not having a guesstimate. You have a very clearly defined understanding of what your overhead expense is. So you take that and you're going to divide that by the amount of hours that you operate monthly. And again, that's going to be specific to just how many hours a day is the office open, how many days on average a month, not, you know, how many different providers you have. And so when you do that, then that's basically giving you your hourly rate. And that's going to be like the bare minimum amount that you need to make in production per hour. So obviously you want to go higher than that, so you aren't always just breaking even, basically. And then I'd say when it comes to those goals too, you might want to factor in, if you are a practice that's collecting at that 91%, factoring that element in. But hopefully, if you're not and you want to learn more on how you can collect more, you know, we're doing usually at least that 98% range for our practices.
Okay, very good. Well, we've got a number of questions left. We will send them to you, and then Monique, you can respond probably to everybody, because just because one person asked the question didn't mean others didn't think about it or wouldn't benefit from the answer.
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to.
Wonderful. All right. So with that, let me remind you that in a few days you will receive an email detailing how to apply to receive your 1 1/2 hours of continuing education credit. I now want to invite you to mark your calendars for Tuesday, January 17th, when my very special guest will be Mr. Kevin Henry, whose presentation is titled The Top 10 Mistakes Dental Practices Make and How to Avoid Them. Kevin Henry has served as a dental publisher for more than 20 years. He is the former group editorial director for Dental Products Report, managing editor for Dental Economics, and editor-in-chief for drbicuspid.com. He now serves as the co-founder for Ignite DA that empowers dental assistants. Course objectives include identifying the biggest mistakes that have cost other practices countless hours and resources, learning how to avoid these mistakes in your practice, discovering how to put systems in place to achieve cohesiveness in your team, practicing verbal skills that create better communication between your team members and your patients, and revealing how each team member affects the bottom line of your practice. This is a must-attend course for all dentists and team members who want to be ready for the new year. It all happens on Tuesday, January 17th, so be sure to save the date and watch your inbox to register. Until then, this is Danny Bobrow thanking you for your commitment to practice perfection, and once again, thank you, Monique.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
Goodbye, everybody.